The academic consensus is that Paul was not the author of 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus, also known as the Pastoral Epistles. Most scholars think that they were written decades after Paul's death by someone who was only pretending to be Paul. Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion, and when I share things like this, there are two kinds of objections that I frequently see thrown back at me. One of these is the notion that when I say academic consensus, what I'm saying is, therefore true. And this is misguided for a couple of different reasons. To begin, most of the scholarship that I have published has been challenging and trying to overturn academic consensuses. If I thought they were infallible or inerrant, I wouldn't be challenging so many of them. Most scholars are engaged in trying to produce arguments that will overturn the consensus view. And this is the other reason that this is misguided. When I say this is the academic consensus, what I mean is this is the argument that at this point in time, based on the available data, has convinced the majority of scholars. And all of those things can change. And again, most scholars are engaged in trying to change those things regarding one or another research question. So no, academic consensus does not mean therefore true. It means if you are interested in understanding what arguments have convinced the most scholars, these are the arguments that have convinced the most scholars. And the second objection is frequently some kind of lengthy, gish-galloping argument about all of the data that indicate the academic consensus is nonsense. And one of the reasons this is problematic is that if these arguments were so strong, they would be the consensus view. They're not. There are arguments that are considered stronger by more scholars. And so if you think an argument is better, go publish it. Go change the consensus view. Now, a lot of people recognize the argument is not going to convince the majority of scholars, so they retreat to the notion that the majority of scholars are hopelessly biased against apologists. And this is profoundly ridiculous in light of one very important observation. If you look at the spectrum of scholarship, from the dedicated critical scholars all the way down to the dedicated apologists, you're going to notice a trend as you move toward the apologetic side of that spectrum. And that trend is that more and more scholars who are publishing these arguments are employed by institutions who force them to sign statements of faith and who will fire them if they take up the position of the opposing side of the spectrum. You will find very few scholars on the critical side of the spectrum who are ever employed by institutions who will fire them if they take up the argument of the other side of the spectrum, at least within biblical studies. So this is not to say that there's anybody anywhere on that spectrum who is without bias. To be human is to be biased. But when it comes to who is convinced by what arguments, the notion that one side of that spectrum is just hopelessly biased against religion or the Bible or something like that is just rhetorical prophylaxis for the dogmas that prop up the arguments of the other side of that spectrum. So again, when I share the academic consensus, I'm achieving one of the main goals of my channel, that is to increase public access to the academic study of the Bible and religion, and the quickest way to do that is to share the academic consensus. And the fit for this video has been Ladies of the DCAU.